All right, hopefully everyone can see and hear me okay. And if you are watching this on a recording or a replay, then you will have the ability to ask questions in the community group, or you can always email me afterwards if you've got any questions. But we are going to go through a Canicross Masterclass tonight, just to give you a bit more of an idea about getting started in Canicross. So for those of you that don't know who I am, my name's Emily Thomas. I have 4 companies now that are dog and dog sport related. So there's Canine Trail Time, which is my retail business, Canactive, which is my hydrotherapy centre, Canicross Coach, which is our in-person training business. And then I've recently set up the Active Dog Academy, which is more about canine conditioning and teaching people about canine well-being as well. So that's more from the therapist side as well. I have been canicrossing since 2009, so a long time now. And I established Canine Trail Time in 2012 because I wanted different colours of harnesses. I'm going to be completely honest here. There were not enough colours and not enough styles on the market for my liking, so I decided to do it myself. I qualified as a canine hydrotherapist in 2019. As I said, Canicross Coach is my coaching business. And as part of that, I actually wrote and deliver an off-qual level 3 award in Canicross coaching as an iPet network training provider with Dawn Crook-Richards from Canics and Toria Seaton, who you may have seen through Canine Trail Time, who is a clinical canine massage therapist. And both of us set up Active Dog Academy in 2023 to help dog owners with more education and injury proofing. So what we're going to cover in this masterclass is what Canicross is, obviously very briefly, because some of you will already know that, who can take part, why you might want to Canicross, what you need to get started, how to get started, and where you can go and when. So firstly, what is Canicross? It's cross-country running with dogs. You do need specialist equipment to Canicross. Some people think that Canicross is just running with dogs, and it's not. There are a few groups out there of people that do just run with dogs, and they have dogs, on leads with collars. That is not what we do with Canicross. And we'll talk through all the equipment in a minute, but it is a specific sport. So it's not just running with dogs, it is a specific sport. Now, it's recognised in its own right by the IFSS, which is the International Federation of Sled Dog Sports. And they have a definition of any sled dog being any breed of dog, any type, any size that is fit to pull in harness. So a lot of people don't think about their dog as a sled dog because obviously if you've got a Jack Russell Terrier, you're not going to think your dog is a sled dog. But under the definition for the sport of Canicross, under the IFSS definition, your dog is a sled dog, which I find quite funny. So who can take part? Anyone without any significant health issues can take part. And when I say significant health issues, I mean something that, you've been told you shouldn't be doing, running as part of that diagnosis. But anybody else, older people, younger people, people who have conditions but have been signed off by their doctor to take part in exercise, all good to take part in Canicross. And when it comes to dogs, we say dogs who are fully grown without significant health issues. And we have mentioned in the Canicross Challenge that this week, talking about ages of when you can get started canicrossing, because it is quite a contentious thing. People will very much argue on the side of you should wait and your dog should be sort of totally fully grown into their sort of 18 months, 2 years old before you actually start. But there's actually information coming out now which contradicts that in terms of it saying that there isn't really any supporting evidence. There isn't any studies that show that doing harness work earlier on actually has any significant detrimental impact on dogs. So it's one of those things where people get quite heated in their opinions about it. As a therapist, I would say that if you're going to be starting your dog off doing a sport in harness, then I would recommend waiting until they are fully grown. But there is not any evidence to say that actually starting off doing gentle work, doing slow work, that's going to do any harm overall. Sorry, I can hear somebody isn't on mute. Could you just mute yourself so that there's no background noise, if that's okay, because it's really distracting. Thank you. If you've got a dog that's slightly older and they're coming to this, midlife, they're sort of 6, 7, that's still okay. Dogs can learn these new things at all sorts of ages. And the same with people. I know a lot of people that have started Canicross in their later years, and because it's quite an inclusive sport and you can start off by basically walking and then building up into canicrossing, that way you can build up to running, and it's good in terms of making that slow development into the sport and not having to sort of be amazingly fit to start off with. One of the myths that I see people sort of spouting out on the internet is that you have to be really fit and you have to be really active, and you have to be able to do all these things before, and it's not the case. It's a good way for people to get themselves and their dogs in better shape, to lose weight and to build up their fitness together. So all ages, weights, fitness levels of people, all breeds and sizes of dogs. The only thing that I would say is potentially a problem is if you have got a brachycephalic breed of dog, so a dog that hasn't got a sort of a normal length nose, and that causes breathing issues. That could potentially be a problem if your dog is struggling to sort of inhale and get all the air that they need in when they're exercising hard. Then obviously that could cause problems. It can also cause problems in terms of thermoregulation, because dogs use that panting to cool themselves down, and obviously they're going to get hotter with canicrossing, and so it can be a little bit of a problem if you've got a dog that has a short snout and they can't thermoregulate properly, because it's going to mean that they're going to overheat very quickly. Having said that, I know plenty of dogs that are considered brachycephalic breeds. So you've got your boxers, you've got your pugs, and I've seen French bulldogs that do it as well, and they would all be considered dogs that would potentially be at risk, but actually they have been fine. As long as they're fit and healthy and signed off by the vet, then you can take part in Canicross. So it's very inclusive. And a lot of people come to the sport with reactive dogs as well, because it's one of the sports that's sort of touted as being good for reactive dogs, because it's inclusive. And that is because all the dogs are attached to you, they're on a lead, they're not all milling around with each other off lead. And generally, on the whole, people are quite respectful of dogs that are reactive and will give you lots of space in Canicross. So it can be really good for getting reactive dogs socialized in a sort of a safe setting. Having said that, there is always the danger that you just sort of assume that your dog will be okay with being in a group situation in Canicross, and sometimes it can be a bit much for them. So we've discussed during the challenge week that it's it's something that you've got to decide for your own dog. You've got to look at your own dog's personality and decide if they're going to be able to cope. But certainly you should be able to cope, starting off on your own and going out and seeing how they get on. So why would you want to Canicross? There are the obvious physical health benefits. You are doing sport, you're going to be exercising, you're going to be getting out there in the fresh air, and so it has a lot of physical health benefits in that respect. As long as you don't overdo it too much too soon, make sure, as with everything that you do, you build up slowly, and obviously don't talk to any of the people that have injured themselves when they're canicrossing, because you know, it happens when you're trail running, because you know, you're going across uneven ground and things like that. And so you know, I'm not going to lie to you, there are things that can happen, but generally on the whole there are a lot of physical health benefits from canicrossing. And for somebody like myself who would never have been running without the dogs, I just wouldn't have. When I first started canicrossing, I actually lost 3.5 stone because I was in a pretty bad physical shape. You know, I hadn't done any proper exercise for years. And it just made me realize how unhealthy that was. And I've always enjoyed being outside and doing things outside, but this was really something that gave me the kick up the backside to realize that actually, you know, I needed to be out there and doing something else. And I don't like being in the gym, and I don't like doing anything sort of inside really. But being out with my dogs gave me a reason to exercise, and so there's a really good physical health benefit. And tied in with that very closely is mental health benefits as well. It gets you out, so it gets you out in the fresh air, you get sunlight when we ever get sunlight in this country, but you know, you're out there and you're just having a change of scene, and both of those are applicable for you and your dog. So I've seen lots of people who have lost weight together with their dog, and I've seen a lot of people who have used Canicross to help with a working dog breed that potentially hasn't had another job to do. There might be other reasons why they haven't taken up other dog sports or other dog activities. Most of the time, I have to say, it's because they've been reactive, and then they come along to Canicross where everything is a little bit more controlled and they don't have to have that face-to-face with other dogs, and they get the physical and the mental health benefits of being around other dogs, being around other people in a you know, nice way, where everybody is sort of heading in the same direction, and you don't get that sort of conflict that you get some of the other dog sports where you're coming into close proximity. It is motivational, Canicross, in terms of once you start doing it with your dog, you discover that you know, they want to do it more, you want to do it more, it becomes a little bit addictive. I started off with 2 dogs. I would say I started off canicrossing with 2 dogs really. The main reason was one of my dogs, but I did really start with the 2. Now I have 4. I would quite happily have more dogs, but that would be a little bit probably a little bit much with my lifestyle, because we're always on the move and doing things, but it definitely becomes addictive. It is very inclusive. It's probably the nicest community that I've ever been in. I had a bit of a horsey background before, and I found that not to be quite as inclusive. But the people that you meet in the Canicross world tend to be very friendly. They want to share knowledge, they want to share stuff with you, and they tend to be very helpful as well. So it's a nice place to be, particularly if you want that sort of community and social aspect, because I have definitely had the benefit of being able to socialize my reactive dogs in that situation and not have any issues. And you go away feeling like, well, you know, at least the whole world isn't against us, because if you do have a reactive dog, that's sometimes the way that you feel with other dog owners. It can be quite sort of demoralizing, only being around other people that don't understand reactivity. So Canicross is definitely somewhere that you can feel included, and you can actually feel that you can be sociable as well. So before you start, what I always tell people to do, and what I teach in any of my courses, is about observing your dog. Because if you can pick up on all the little things that your dog is doing as they're free running, and as they're moving without being in harness, and noting down the way that your dog moves, and just getting a good idea of when they're comfortable and what they like doing, and how they look perhaps when they're not comfortable as well, so that you can make sure that when you start canicrossing, everything that you're doing is very positive for your dog, and you are not actually doing anything which is causing them any discomfort or, you know, any reason to get anxious. So I always say to people, make sure that you start observing your dog outside of the canicross environment first, and get to know your dog, like the way they move, watch the way that they walk, watch the way that they trot, watch the way that they go to the toilet. It sounds a bit silly, but I'm always watching what my dogs are doing and picking up on different things, because it can be the difference between, you know, something happening and something not. I'll give you an example of that. Is because I was always watching my dogs, when one of my first dogs started to get too hot, the only indication that I had was that his back legs would go a little bit stiffer. He would start to move a little bit more robotically. And if I hadn't really been watching him, I wouldn't really have noticed that. But that then became a clear sign to me moving forwards that he was actually beginning to overheat and I needed to stop. He was a dog that ran hot, if you like. He didn't thermoregulate very well. And even when it wasn't actually that hot outside, he would still start to overheat. And the only indication that I got of that was that his back legs went a little bit stiff when he was running. So it's these little things that if you start looking at what's normal, then you start picking up on what's normal, not normal. Have a look and see if there's anything physical that you think might be there to stop you running with your dog. Is there something that you know of? Is there something that you have had diagnosed that you need to consult a vet on? So the other thing that I have seen quite a lot in groups is people saying, oh, my dog's been diagnosed with arthritis and I'm really, you know, sad because I'm going to have to stop canicrossing. But actually, if you have a chat with your vet, and explain what you do, and explain that actually canicross doesn't have to be, you know, a sort of a really high impact activity. It's not for a dog at all. Then they might be okay with you continuing with it. And certainly my very first dog, Tegan, who I talk about quite a lot because she was the whole reason that I got into this, she has an arthritic diagnosis from about 5.5 years old. She had arthritis in both her carpal joints, which is essentially the wrist joints. And the vet actually said to me, don't stop doing stuff with her as long as you're not forcing her to do anything that she doesn't want to do. And believe me, I couldn't have done that even if I wanted to. As long as she's not doing, you know, too much and being forced to go further than she's capable, the movement will actually help prolong her active life. Because with arthritis, and particularly the arthritis that she had, and that's the key here, like I had it diagnosed and I had a vet, this conversation with the vet, but her arthritis, it meant that actually the canicross was quite good for her because it kept her moving in a controlled way. And that is what vets will sometimes say. If you explain what you do, the fact that it's controlled and it's in a harness will mean that potentially, you know, you can carry on with certain health conditions with your dog, but you do need to make sure you've cleared it with your vet. So I'm all up for like saying, yeah, you know, bring your dog along, and it is very inclusive, but always make sure that if there's something you're worried about, get them checked out with a vet first. So what you need to start, I have put down here the things that I think are essential. So a harness for your dog, good fitting, purpose made sports harness. We'll talk about that in a second. Belt for you and a bungee line to connect you. You do need trail trainers. The amount of people that start canicrossing with sort of normal road running trainers and then realize what a horrible mistake that is. So if you haven't got trail trainers, get some good grippy trainers. And I've also said on here a good sense of humor, because I do think sometimes you do need a good sense of humor. Some of the stuff that happens, you know, when squirrels cross the trail, when deer get in front of you, you need to have a bit of a sense of humor about it at times. I'm not going to lie, I lose my sense of humor sometimes, but for the most part, I can laugh it off when things go wrong. So your harness, the harness that you need for your dog, I would implore you to choose for your dog and not the brand or color, because so many people say to me, I want a pink harness for my dog, or I want a blue harness for my dog. And it might be that, you know, you can have a blue or a pink harness for your dog, but that should not be your top criteria for choosing the harness. And the other thing that happens a lot is that people ask for recommendations, because obviously you would ask for a recommendation in a Canicross group, and people pile in with what they've got for their dog, but actually it might not be the right thing for your dog. So you have to, and I really do believe this, there is no sort of sidestepping this. You have to do a bit of research for your own dog. And whether that be go away and read some articles on you know, harness fit and what harness suits what type of dog, because there's quite a lot out there now. There's so much more information out on the internet than there was when I first started, because you just didn't have the choice when I first started. It was a short harness like the one pictured, or it was an X-back. And then things started to filter in, but there's so much choice now, and I understand it can be overwhelming, but you will have to do a little bit of research on your own just to make sure that you have got the right one for your dog. Once you've decided on the right style of harness, the fit is absolutely crucial. And unfortunately, that is something that can also change. Because if you start doing sport with your dog, they can build up muscle, they can lose weight, they might bulk up across the shoulders, or they might slim down. So you could start off with one harness that fits perfectly, and then after 6 months of canicrossing, you find that it doesn't quite fit the way that it did. That can be annoying. I completely understand that, but it happens. It's like us. We change shape as well when we start a new sport, when we do more of a particular thing. So it does make sense. And if you do need to change the harness, then so be it. But generally speaking, most dogs will be okay in the harness that they start out in. But that fit is crucial. As a basic rule, I advise people to go for a longer style harness for stronger pullers, because the longer style harnesses distribute the pull down the length of the body and also through the chest piece. So the pull gets pulled down away from the throat through the chest piece, which is basically the strongest point that your dog can pull against. And it's going to allow them to still pull and be balanced. And then it distributes the force of them pulling down that length and out into the bungee line, which is connected to you. So if you have a strong pulling dog who is always out in front of you, I would always recommend, unless you have a specific reason for not wanting a long harness, and that could be behavioral, that could be because your dog doesn't like long harnesses, and that I see that quite a lot. But there are other reasons as well that it might not suit. But I would always, as a rule, go for a long harness for stronger pulling dogs. Shorter harness for more leisurely pulling dogs. So dogs that are just a little bit less kind of, you know, motivated, a bit more, you know, chilled out about the whole thing, who might just trot beside you or with you and match your pace. A shorter harness will be fine for them and might actually suit them better, because you've got something that isn't going to flap around and distract them. And, you know, you can actually sometimes get a better fit with shorter harnesses as well, because they tend to have a little bit more adjustment than some of the longer ones. So as a general rule, longer harnesses for strong pullers, short for leisurely pullers. I have got this 5-star harness fitting rules, which I use whenever I do any harness fittings for dogs. So we've got over on the left-hand side, we've got Yogi, my dog, and it just shows whereabouts on the dog without a harness on you need to be looking at. So it is neck, shoulder, chest, ribs, and hips. So on the right-hand side, we've got a dog in a non-stop free motion. And what you are looking for is that the neck doesn't sit too high. It doesn't come up into the fleshy part of the throat. And you might need to pull back on the harness I mean, generally speaking, you have to pull back on the harness to see the fit properly anyway, because they're going to be pulling in it. But you need to check whether that is actually riding right up into the throat. It might sit very close, but as long as you've not got anything putting pressure on the fleshy part of their neck, then you're okay with the neck. The bit that I see people get wrong most, I think, is the shoulder, because the shoulders aren't left free. So what I mean by that is you've got this big shoulder bone that's called the scapula in the dog's shoulder, and that has to swing forward, back and forth. It pivots back and forward. It's supported against your dog's body just by muscles, ligaments, and tendons. There's no actual joint in a dog's shoulder. Like we've got a shoulder joint, and I mean, there is a joint in a dog's shoulder, but it's not skeletal. It's made up of muscles, tendons, and ligaments. So that shoulder needs to move really freely. And what tends to happen is that people don't like how snug the neck needs to be to leave the shoulder free. So they will have a harness that they think fits on the neck because it's nice and it gives them lots of room and isn't near the throat, but then it will be creeping down over the shoulder. And that's what that arrow is showing with the shoulder here. You don't want anything over the shoulder. All of this should be free. And then we've got the chest area. So I'm talking about just behind the front legs. You don't want anything too close in behind the front legs. Probably the second and third, I'm going to put them together because they do usually go together. But you should be able to feel the end of your dog's rib cage. And there is what's known as a floating rib at the end of your dog's rib cage. Your harness should not come along the body behind that rib, because what is going to happen if they pull really hard is that harness will hook up under the rib, and it will actually be putting pressure into your dog's soft organs, so their stomach, and all the organs that are sort of left underneath that lumbar spine where there's no rib cage protection. So you don't want anything pulling up into their stomach. It's just not going to be comfortable. So it needs to lie along the ribs and not behind the ribs when your dog is pulling. And connected with that is the hips. So you've got, you will hopefully be able to feel your dog's, what we call colloquially pin bones. So the top of their hips, there should be a point that you can feel on either side, and your harness shouldn't be coming over that, as in like pressing down over it and causing any restriction there, because that your dog is designed to move, they're a quadruped, they're designed to move with everything connected front to back. And if you have any restriction over the hips, what you're doing is you are restricting the movement that is generated in the hind end and restricting it being transferred through to the front and vice versa. And dogs are highly efficient at running, so any restrictions to that can actually cause problems long term. You might find that your dog gets tightness in what we call the lumbosacral region, and they might need massage, they might need physio, but that is a place, think about it on yourself. It's also where we get problems with our back, our lower back area, and it's because the spine at that point is unsupported by any other skeletal structure. And if it's restricted in any way or put through too much pressure, then it can cause a build-up of sort of knots in the muscles and muscle tightness as your body reacts to try and help that, help that area of the body release. So going on to the belt. The belt is very much a personal choice for the person. So it's up to you whether you want padded, whether you want leg straps. Correct fit is often the key to comfort. So it might be that actually you think you're going to be more comfortable in a padded belt without leg straps. But if you get a correctly fitted belt, then a lightweight belt with leg straps is actually going to be more comfortable for you. It's very much a case of trying things on and seeing what you feel most comfortable with. But again, I think the key thing to note about belts is that you should always be positioning them around your hips and not your lower back, because I see a lot of people with their belts too high, and they've got them up in their sort of waist area, because they are called waist belts, so it does make sense. But where you want your belt positioned is low. So all three of these belts are positioned low. You've got them so that the force of the pull when the dog is pulling is going to be distributed across the widest part of your body, which is like skeletally, which is your hips, and it will basically mean that you've got a much more stable base for setting yourself if your dog does, you know, suddenly go off, or you know, they do pull very hard. You've got a much more stable base if your belt is situated around your hips rather than your waist, because if it's higher up on your waist, then you've got it basically pulling into your lower back and that lumbar region, which we've just talked about, not being good. You can actually do quite a lot of damage to your back. So always make sure that your belt is positioned low. And then when we come to lines, bungee lines, what I say to people is there's not a huge amount of difference in lines in general. Most of them do exactly the same thing, but the only difference, or the main difference being, is the lengths that you can get them in. So with the short lines, you have the most control because your dog is closest to you. You might not want that if you've got a small dog that you don't want sort of underneath your feet. In which case, if you still want to have a bit of control, but you want them a little bit further away, then you might go for a mid-line, which is a bit of both. And then your standard Canicross line is the 2 meters when stretched, which gives the freedom for your dog to run out in front of you. So if you've got a strong pulling dog, you want to be using the standard Canicross length line to give them that freedom to pull out in front. While they're learning, again, you might want to, if you think they're going to pull strongly, but they're a little bit unsure of their voice cues and that kind of thing, you might want to try a mid-length line. And short lines came in because people were running a park run with their dogs, and park run stipulated that you had to have a short line. So the park run lengths are about 1.2 meters stretched, because they said about a meter, and unstretched they are slightly less than that. Obviously park run have changed their rules on running with dogs now, and you can still run with them in your hand, but not on a belt. Mid-length is about 1.6 meters stretched, and like I said, the standard is about 2 meters. So I would just say, when it comes to choosing your bungee line, choose a length that's appropriate for the control that you need. So how do you actually get started? There are lots of different ways that you can get started canicrossing. The first one is on your own, and that is how I started. I literally went out on my own and just started to experiment with seeing whether I could run with the dogs. I didn't know anything about kit particularly. I didn't know anything about voice cues. I just started running, and then decided that I wanted to have a look and see if there was anybody else in the area that was running. I actually went to a race before I ever did a social run, which is not the way that I would recommend doing it to anyone. Because if you've ever been to a Canicross race, it can be quite hectic. And I would advise anyone that hasn't raced before to just have a look at the racing situation and make sure it's going to be suitable for you and your dog. Everybody is very friendly and everybody is very welcoming. It doesn't matter, who you're racing with. But you definitely want to go and have a look and make sure that it is the right environment for you and your dog. You also might find that if you've got like a local, excuse me, trail race that allows dogs, it'll be a slightly set up again. So go along, speak to the organisers, find out what they've got in place for dogs, and make sure you can make the most of the experience. So yeah, I started on my own, went to my first race and decided I loved it, then started to look at social clubs. But now there are so many more social clubs out there. even if there isn't one really close to you, you might have to drive for an hour to go and meet up with people. But I would really advise you to do that if you haven't sort of gone out in a social group before, because it's so much fun. The dogs absolutely love it on the whole, and you do tend to learn a lot from other people going out in a social group, and there's so much experience in some of the social groups now as well. Plus, they can often have a really decent kit bag for you to try out stuff before you buy. So if they advertise that you can try out kit if you go along to one of their runs, then it is honestly one of the best ways to be able to see if your dog is happy, to see if the kit suits you, and to avoid you making a mistake in your purchases, basically. So if you can get along to a social club, that is a great way of getting started. Obviously, you can find yourself a Canicross coach. There are a lot of those coming about now. Lots of people coming through who want to teach other people about how to get started canicrossing and share how much fun it is. So if you want to sort of go down a bit more structured a route for getting started, which can be really useful if you're quite unsure about how your dog is going to cope, if you're a bit more nervous about yourself and making sure that you build up properly and slowly, a Canicross instructor or a Canicross coach will definitely help you to do that, and give you lots of pointers. They will generally be quite experienced in Canicross. Check out their experience, but they will generally have been doing it for a number of years and have been racing and be able to help you train your cues, which is the next thing that I was going to move on to, because sometimes people start running with their dog and don't realize that actually there are a lot of cues that you potentially could train, and you do need to train some cues before you go out there and you start doing it properly. So you can start training your cues on walks. You can start what we call canny hiking to get your lefts on your rights in, and a couple of other cues that we're going to talk about in a minute. And you can also use it like a Couch to 5K app. The NHS Couch to 5K app is a good one, but there are lots now where people will actually talk to you through your phone as you're going along, and it can be quite motivational to sort of use a structured app like that to get going, particularly if you've not got any base level fitness to work up from. I've mentioned races, and there are plenty of Canicross specific races now. There are also clubs who are doing Canicross and bike jaw, so the wheeled sports with scooters as well. And then you've got sled dog races, which also include big teams of dogs going out with a dry land rig. So you've got a lot of choices of races, and as I mentioned, also human races that you can have a Canicross entry. They can be a lot of fun too. One thing that if you're not going out with a coach or doing something in a more structured way, it might be missed out, but you really need to think about warming up and cooling down. If you go to a running club, a normal running club, they will go through a warm up and a cool down with you. But what I found when I started was that the Canicross social clubs did not. And people just used to get their dogs out of the car, and because the dogs were so hyped up about running and getting excited, it was just basically we're off as soon as you get everybody out of the car, everybody together, and off you go. But I would really advise you to take a look at warming up and cooling down and getting some routines in place for that, because again, with my therapist hat on, a lot of the things that I regret about when I first started was that I didn't really know about warming up and cooling down, because I didn't have a sporty background, didn't like running, hadn't been to a running club, and hadn't really done any other sports. However, I should really have known because of my horsey background, because we would never have done anything with the horses without warming them up first. But it is something that it does get missed. So do make sure that when you're thinking about starting out, make sure you have a bit of a warm up and a cool down routine for your dogs as well as yourself. So a bit about cues. I've mentioned training voice cues, and that's how you need to get started training your voice cues. So there are a few things, general things about voice cues that I like to sort of teach people about. And the main things are to keep it simple. So don't overcomplicate it. Whatever you're trying to teach your dog, make sure it's just one word. Keep it positive, keep everything that you do positive. You don't want your dog to feel that they are getting something wrong or there's any kind of negative association with Canicross. You want everything to be really easy for them to achieve and really positive for them when they do. You need to be consistent. So, excuse me, don't start changing the cues that you use just because somebody has said to you, oh, I don't do that, I do this. If you've already started training something, then stick with it, keep the consistency. Think about the tone of your voice when you're issuing your voice cues. So when I say that, I mean, if you are encouraging your dog to go on, then a higher pitch will help them to sort of feel that energy from you. So if you're encouraging your dog to pull or go forward, a higher pitched energy will definitely help. Whereas if you're wanting them to slow down, then you might want to just drop the tone of your voice and make that a bit sort of calmer and slower and deeper, because dogs will respond to that as well. The one thing that I know I do, and I recognize that I do it, and I hold my hand up to it, is I talk too much. I give too many cues. I talk too much to my dogs all the time. Don't do it. You end up becoming white noise. So, for example, if your dog is already running out in front of you, and they're going, and you've sort of, your on cue is go, and you've gone go, 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 and they're out in front of you and they are running in front of you, zip it. Like, that is enough. Praise them and then quiet. And the amount of people that I see sort of almost nagging their dogs to keep moving, and I'm like, the dog is in front of you, the dog is moving forward, they're doing what they're supposed to do. It might not be as fast as you want them to, or they're not pulling as hard, but they are actually doing what you've asked. So don't become white noise to them, because they will just tune you out. It will become something that's happening in the background that they don't have to pay any attention to. And you want your cues to be really clear so that when you do give them, they're listening, and they are going to respond to it. Because, the best Canicrossers that I've seen barely speak to their dogs. And it's literally just a cue. The dog will have learned that what that cue means. They will respond to that. And, the partnership is really clear when you see them running together. So always set your dog up for success. And we talked about this a little bit in the challenge, using the things that are around you to make sure that your dog doesn't fail. So when you're starting out teaching rights and lefts, use pathways where they don't have any other option but to turn right, and then call the cue as they turn right. So they learn, oh, okay, turning this way is associated with the cue right. And you're not sort of having a battle with them over, them turning the wrong way. The other kind of things that you can do is use gates. So when you're coming up to a gate and you want your dog to slow down, they will start slowing down automatically, and then you can cue the behavior. You can bring in the word steady and then reward them for it. So they're actually doing the behavior before you cue it and then reward them for it. And they will learn much more quickly that way than if you just are in the middle of a field and you tell them to steady, and then you have to wait for them to kind of work out what you want them to do. So always set your dog up for success, because you want this to be something fun and bond building between the two of you that you do, and you don't want it to cause frustration for either of you. So these are the main cues that I will talk to people about and talk to people about training. The first one is always a pull cue, because a lot of people actually forget to train their dogs to pull. They will just wait until their dogs pull and then not say anything, not cue it, and just sort of take it for granted that the dog is going to pull. And some dogs will, when you put them in a harness and you attach them to you, you don't need to say anything and they will just go. But other dogs, you will need to actually train it. And there is a benefit in training the pull cue for dogs that do just naturally pull as well. And that is that you can then teach them not to pull when you want them to walk to heel. So it's always worth training a pull cue. A line out cue is another one that I use a lot. And I have put a video in the community group showing my dogs out on a run and doing a line out to get them focused. And that is essentially what a line out does. So they go to the end of the line, end of the bungee line, and you reward them for standing at the end of the line. The reward for my dogs is that they get to go. You know, they know that that is a sort of a setup cue. Right, come on, we're all getting together, line out, and off we go. And they know they're about to be allowed to run on. So you can pick your reward based on whatever works best for your dog. But I would definitely think about teaching a line out cue, particularly if you want to race as well, because it means that if you've got a really good line out, you don't have to stand there and have a battle with your dog on a start line before you go. So left and right cues, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. You need to teach right and left so that your dog knows which way you want them to go on the trail. Stop or a wait cue, really useful if you have to run and stop at a road, or if there's any hazards up ahead. It's a really good thing to train. And like I said, you can use natural obstacles to help you train that. A steady cue, that one is a little bit trickier to train, can take a little bit longer, but again, use things on your pathway that can help you to shape that behavior. And it will come. It's something that can take a little bit more time, but it's worthwhile having. And a steady cue will just help you if they're going a bit too fast towards something, if you're not sure of the ground, that kind of thing. Straight on cue is a good one if you've got a distraction that you want them to go straight past. So if somebody has pulled over on a trail with their dog to let you past, if your dog knows a straight on or an ignore cue, my straight on is an ignore cue, but it's also a directional cue because you can use it if you know, you've got different pathways to take. It's a really useful one, and it's quite a strong cue as well. So I would always recommend people train a straight on. It can stop the hassle of having your dog keep stopping to sniff or to wee. As long as you've allowed them a bit of time before you start to do those things, then they shouldn't necessarily need to do it on a 5K run. So straight on cue can just help you know, chivvy them along. A back cue is something that is really useful when you are going downhill. So if you want to get your dog in behind you to go downhill to make it easier and safer for you, a back cue, behind or with me, all those words, it doesn't matter what you use as long as you are consistent and your dog understands them. The idea is that's going to keep them behind you when you're going downhill, but it can also really help with a reactive dog if you can get them behind you to go past something that they're reacting to. If they've got a really strong back or behind cue, then that can really help with that, managing that reactivity. And then the last one that I've got on here is an over cue, which is a bit more tricky. You really need to have your right and lefts sorted first and very solid in terms of a voice cue. But over can be really useful to pass people on a trail. So if you've got dog walkers and you need to go around them, you can direct your dog over and then the direction, and they move over on the trail. They know they're not actually turning, they're just moving over. And I use over quite a lot when we're racing, because if somebody comes up behind me and they want to overtake, then I will move out of the way for them. So an over cue for my dogs is a great one to get them out the way. But also, like I say, if I was going to be passing somebody who was out walking, or, you know, if you get a cyclist come up behind you or something, it's just good to be able to get your dogs out of the way of any hassle. So those are the 8 cues that I would recommend you start looking at training if you haven't already, and think about how you're going to train those with your dogs. So where you can go canicrossing and when, Ideally, you want to be off-road. They are better in terms of being more interesting and more more enriching for your dogs to be on off-road trails. The ground can be better for them rather than to have the tarmac or anything that's going to potentially sort of damage their paws. So we like off-road trails the most for canicrossing. It's really good to have somewhere that's got natural water, and natural water that's running, so not stagnant water in sort of lakes where you can get like blue-green algae and that kind of thing. But if you've got like a really nice natural or something that you can take your dog by. Could you please mute whoever's just come on, because I can hear the background noise again. Natural water and shaded or sheltered areas are really good for running dogs in, because even if it's cold temperatures, the shaded and the shelter will protect you from that. And then obviously if it is sunnier and you've got more of a warm temperature, then the shaded trees and things will protect you from the sun. So it's really useful to have a think about where you're going to go running with your dog, and with the types of environments you're going to go in. It's better obviously for your dog not to be running in higher temperatures. We tend not to have like the best summers in the UK, but it can get up to 30 odd degrees in the summer, and you really want to be staying out of those temperatures. There's always a bit of a discussion. This is something else that comes up every year, and you will see people getting quite heated about this. But the lower temperatures are better, and obviously unless you know that your dog is going to be okay, and they're not going to struggle in the higher temperatures, then if it's too hot for you, if you're thinking, oh, I don't want this t-shirt on, imagine how your dog is feeling. So always stick with running at the time of day when the temperatures are lower if it is warm. But one of the key things to watch out for is humidity, because the humidity is something that really affects your dog's ability to cool themselves down. And that is what is the problem, particularly in the UK, because we can have quite reasonable temperatures, but because the humidity is so high, our dogs will struggle when they're running because they can't thermoregulate. So it's just something that you need to bear in mind when you're starting canicrossing. And like I said to you, one of the things that I noticed about one of my dogs was that he would run hot, and he couldn't cope with even the higher humidity and the lower temperatures. So I had to really keep an eye on him when we were running. And the best thing to do is, if you are worried, if you are in doubt, just stop, just get them to cool down, get them to some natural water, get them to some shade. I do a lot of teaching on trying to look out for heat-related illness in dogs. It really worries me, and one of the things that I just say is, it's not worth the risk. So if you're in any doubt at all, just don't. So in conclusion, Canicross is open and accessible to most dogs and people. It can be great for older people, younger people, older dogs, younger dogs, depending on how young. You have to think about health conditions, but actually there are only really a few or a minority of people and dogs that won't be able to participate on some level. It's beneficial in multiple ways. So you've got physical health benefits, mental health benefits, and it is just generally a really nice community to be in. You've got different pathways to get involved. You can start out on your own. You can get involved with social clubs. You can go to races. You can get a coach. So there's lots of different ways that you can actually get started. And in terms of a hobby, it actually has a relatively low startup cost. So apart from the initial outlay for your harness, your belt, your line, and your trail trainers, you don't really have a lot of other costs. It's when you start really getting involved in it that the costs come, and you get more dogs, and you get a van, and all these things, and all the dogs need jackets and all that kind of thing. So it is relatively low startup cost for a hobby. It can be done locally from home, or there are ways that you can get to events, traveling to go and do races, and to meet other people in social groups. So it's something that you can make of it what you will. So for further information on any of the things that I've talked about, I've got a lot of resources on my website, www.k9trailtime.com, and then the coaching website, which is www.canicrosscoach.com. You can find me on social media, K9 Trail Time or Canicross Coach UK. I'm more than happy to help anyone with kit questions. We can, if you want to find a Canicross coach in your area, we can help with that. There's also a list of clubs on K9 Trail Time, which need updating, and a list of events on K9 Trail Time, which is constantly being updated if you want to go and have a look at that. There are also other ways that you can find out more information from me. So we've got a K9 Trail Time VIP membership, which is £15 a month, and you get a monthly CPD included in that, plus the monthly Ask Me Anything. All these different things that you can ask about. It doesn't necessarily need to be Canicross, it could be nutrition related. I get in experts to come and talk about things, so I can always find out answers to questions for you if that's something that you want to know. So that's £15 a month. We've got our Canicross Foundations course online now, which is £99. We're running a live foundations course in February, which is 119. So we teach that over 4 weeks and go through it all with you on Zoom calls. And I've now got an Ultimate Canicross starter package on the website as well, under the Canicross Consultant. So there are lots of ways that you can find out more information if you actually want to take it seriously. So I am just going to, if you're watching this on a recording or a replay, you can ask any questions in the group, or you can email me, emilyt@k9trailtime.com. But otherwise, I am going to turn off the recording now, and then we can go to the questions on Zoom.